This is the second thing Jesus says about the Spirit in this passage. He says, his Spirit is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive. Now, when it comes to truth, what is true, it's a question and a quest that has either been pursued or ignored with great vigor. Okay? Pilate, the Roman governor who was examining Jesus, trying to determine whether or not he should be crucified, he asked Jesus who he was, and Jesus said that he was sent to be a witness, to bear witness to the truth. And so then Pilate, in response, asks him this profound question: what is truth? What is truth? And the pillage of the media and all the election drama are really questions about who is really right, what's really true, and what's really best for our country. Can never really get away from the question and the quest for truth. Adolf Hitler said, "There is no such thing as truth." Kind of sounds like he thought at least that statement was true. Friedrich Nietzsche said, "There are no eternal facts as there are no absolute truths." Kind of seems like he thinks that's an eternal fact and an absolute truth. You see, it's self-refuting, isn't it? The moment you say there's no truth, you make a truth claim. You can't get away from the desire and the need for truth. Especially in our age, the information age, the internet age, the age when there's just so much out there, there's so many opinions and ideas and perspectives. We need to know what is really true and what truly matters. Some of you today, you're longing for truth. And this is what Jesus promises. It's what he promises to those who believe. In John 8:32, Jesus said that those who follow him, those who believe in him, those who trust him and abide in him, he says this, he says that then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Oh, there's a freedom in embracing the truth of Christ. The beginning of the chapter we're studying today, Jesus says in John 14, verse 6, he says, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life." I am the truth. That is a monumental claim. Like to say that, Jesus centers all of truth on his person and his words. He is the epitome of truth. That is either the most egotistical, self-maniacal, self-deluded claim that any living person has ever made, or that is the most helpful, comforting, and freeing gift that God has ever given to us. If Jesus is really sent by God to us to tell us what is true, that just makes everything easier. Then we've got a way to kind of see and sort through all the fog and the mess, because if we just turn to Jesus and believe and trust what he says is true, and knowing it's true, that gives us this sense of peace and mind and makes us feel safe. Just everything coming through like one person, that kind of simplifies things a bit, right? Makes it a little bit easier. All right, well, I don't know about all this stuff, but whatever Jesus says, that's true, and that's what I'm going to take as truth. It'll never lead us astray. Maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, yeah, but I hear you, but how do you know, Dwayne? How do you know what Jesus says is really true? A couple ways. One, what Jesus says makes sense. God is a God of order, of logic, reason, consistency, coherency, and truth is like that. Truth is always true, and it accounts for everything. So, for example, in book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 20, says that the invisible attributes, the eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived. It can be clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So we can look into and study the things that have been made in creation, and we can reason that an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God made it all. That's reasonable. That's not a crazy thing to think. There are good arguments for the existence of God. We go through them in the very first week of our Theology 101 membership class. So, the cosmological, the teleological, the ethological arguments for the existence of God, they're logical. They make sense. So one way we know what Jesus says is true is that it makes sense. Everybody pretty much universally recognizes and accepts that Jesus was a great teacher, right? He taught some great things that made a lot of sense. Yeah, Jesus he says makes sense. But that often isn't enough. Like Calvin said from the quote we read earlier, we cannot receive the Spirit. Reason and truth, they're not detached or disconnected from persons, from our person. That's why by truth and morality, they go hand in hand. Objective truth is objective, but it's also connected to subjects, subjective people who interact with it, which brings us to the second way we can know that what Jesus says is true, and that's that it pierces our hearts. The Bible in Hebrews 4:12 says that the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to soul and spirit of joints and marrow, discerning the thoughts and the intentions of the heart. The whole book of John, from the main passage that we're reading from today, it starts out the book in the very beginning, in the first chapter, saying that the word of God, it became flesh in Jesus, into a very person. So if any words of the Bible qualify for being the words of God, it's Jesus, who he is and what he says. Hebrews here, that passage is saying that there is a way in which the words of Jesus pierce our hearts. Like a sword that it cuts through all the crap and gets down to the real thing of who we really are and what's really going on in us. Down to the inner bowels of our person. Jesus' truth pierces our hearts. This is why you can have a philosophical or theological argument with a person about God and it not really change anything they think or not really result in them becoming a Christian, because deep down, every issue is a heart issue. Every issue is a heart issue. Just hearing and being convinced of some logical, systematic, reasonable argument is not enough. Truth piercing the heart has to take place. That's what I'm praying will happen for some of you right now in this moment, that God's truth would pierce your heart. For some people, though, it's like there's just this like fog or this veil, and it doesn't matter what you say. There's nothing you can say that will convince them. Only God's truth piercing the heart will work. And this is the spirit that Jesus gives us, this spirit of truth. The spirit who's very logical and very practical, and the spirit that pierces hearts with the truth of God. And what a gift that is. It's a wonderful thing that God has given us brains that can think and reason well, that we can consider him and it makes sense. And it's a wonderful thing that God, he goes past our heads all the way down to our hearts. The place where often the real issues, the real hurts, the real questions that need to be healed with the solve of God's truth.